Oh, my coat!
I knew you'd never make it. That's why I left you.
I knew you'd never make it. That's why I left you. He said it loud enough for the whole street to hear. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't even look at him. She just checked her watch and smiled. If you love stories about silent strength, divine timing, and the kind of revenge that arrives in a gold-plated helicopter, you are in the right place. Hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling us what you think is about to happen, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. We post every week. And trust us, this one, you're going to want to watch until the very last second. Now, let's get into it. Her name was Zara Collins, and if you passed her on the street, which on this particular Tuesday afternoon in downtown Atlanta, several people did, you might have made the same mistake that most people made about Zara Collins. You might have underestimated her. She was standing at the corner of Peachtree and Fifth, one hand resting on the strap of a simple black tote bag, the other tucked into the pocket of a caramel-colored trench coat. No flashy jewelry, no designer logo splashed across her chest. Just clean lines, good posture, and the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need a headline. The bus stop bench was wet from an earlier drizzle, so she stood, unbothered, patient. Her natural hair was pinned up elegantly beneath a silk scarf, and her deep brown skin caught the afternoon light in a way that made strangers glance twice without quite knowing why. She was waiting, but not for the bus. She knew something no one else on that street knew, and that knowledge sat in her chest like a warm secret, curling at the corners the way a smile does right before it breaks open. But before the secret could arrive, before the sky could deliver what it was carrying, the past decided to show up first. It always does, doesn't it? The white Porsche 911 came from the left lane, engine purring with the kind of arrogance that only an overpriced car and an underdeveloped character can produce together. It slowed at the intersection, not because of traffic, but because the man behind the wheel had spotted something he recognized, or rather, someone. Smith Calloway pressed his designer sunglasses up the bridge of his nose and leaned forward in the driver's seat. His jaw shifted. A slow, ugly grin spread across his face. The kind that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with hunger. The particular hunger of a man who had spent the last 2 years telling himself he'd made the right choice, and who needed the world to confirm it constantly. He hadn't expected to see her today. But then again, Smith had always believed that the universe arranged itself around him. He looked to his right. Brianna Walsh, his girlfriend of 8 months, was typing something on her phone, her blonde hair falling in careful waves over one shoulder. She was beautiful in the way that Smith collected beautiful things, for display. She looked up, caught his expression, and followed his gaze to the bus stop. "Who's that?" she asked. "An ex," Smith said. And the word landed like a coin he was flipping. Heads, he walks away. Tails. Toss, he makes it a moment. He chose tails. He always chose tails. Smith Calloway eased off the brake and rolled the Porsche slowly toward the bus stop. He could have turned. He could have driven past. But there was a puddle, a generous, glorious puddle, sitting between the road and the curb, dark with rainwater and grime. And Smith saw it the way a lesser man sees an opportunity. He gunned the engine. The Porsche surged forward. The right front tire hit the puddle at exactly the angle Smith intended, and a wide, filthy arc of water launched off the road and hit Zara Collins full on the left side. It drenched her coat, splashed across her silk scarf, soaked her shoes. Brianna gasped, then laughed, covering her mouth with her hand. Smith was already pulling over, already throwing open the car door. Already stepping out onto the sidewalk with the energy of a man who had rehearsed this moment in a fantasy he didn't know he'd been having. "Oh my God," he said, spreading his hands wide in mock horror. "Zara? Is that... Wow. I almost didn't recognize you." Zara turned to face him slowly. Her expression was unreadable. She looked at the water dripping from her coat. Then she looked at Smith. Then, and this was the part that should have warned him, should have sent every instinct in his body running. She looked at her watch. She said nothing. Smith took her silence as defeat. He always had. It was the most consistent mistake he'd ever made with her, and he was making it again now, in front of traffic, and a phone camera, and the whole indifferent city. "I heard you were still out here catching the bus," he said, leaning against the Porsche with his arms crossed. "I mean, no judgment. Some people just peak early, right?" Brianna had climbed out of the passenger side now, phone already raised, already recording. She was smiling with the practiced ease of someone who had been trained by social media to confuse other people's embarrassment for entertainment. "Smith, babe, who is she?" Brianna asked, her voice carrying that particular sweetness that is actually something else entirely. "This," Smith said, gesturing at Zara the way you gesture at a cautionary tale, "is someone I used to date. Back when I thought potential was enough." He laughed. "Turns out, potential doesn't pay rent." He was performing now. He knew the camera was on. He straightened up, rolled his shoulders, let his eyes run over Zara with theatrical pity. "I remember when I used to offer to drive you places," he said. "You remember that? And I told you, Zara, I told you. You need to get yourself together. Build something. You had ideas, sure. Everybody's got ideas. But ideas without execution?" He shook his head slowly. "That's just daydreaming. And look where daydreaming got you." He gestured at the bus stop with a sweep of his hand, like a game show host revealing a losing prize. "Still waiting for the bus. Still out here with the same nothing you had when I left." Brianna giggled behind the camera. Smith leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to something that was almost gentle, the most dangerous register of cruelty, the kind dressed up as concern. "I'm not saying this to be mean, Zara. I genuinely hope you figure it out. But I knew. I knew back then that you weren't going anywhere. That's why I left you. Some people are built for more, and some people just aren't." He stepped back, satisfied, complete. Zara Collins looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The city moved around them. Cars, footsteps, the distant sound of a vendor, a pigeon lifting off a ledge. The afternoon sun sat low and golden at the end of the block. And then, from somewhere above and behind and everywhere at once, a sound. It started as a vibration more than a noise. Something felt in the chest before it was heard by the ears. A rhythmic, deep thudding that seemed to come from the direction of the sun itself. Smith frowned, looked up instinctively. The people at the bus stop looked up. The driver in the car behind the Porsche looked up. A woman pushing a stroller on the opposite sidewalk stopped walking and looked up. Then everyone saw it. The helicopter came from the south, moving low and deliberate over the Atlanta skyline, catching the late afternoon light in a way that made it look, for a moment, like something from a dream or a film or a story someone was telling about a life too extraordinary to be real. It was gold. Not painted gold. Not gold-tinted. Gold-plated, genuinely, blindingly, unapologetically gold. The kind of gold that announces itself before it arrives, that bends light around it, that makes people stop mid-sentence and lose their train of thought entirely. It was enormous, and written across its belly, in bold black lettering, that could be read from the street as clearly as a billboard. "Happy one-year anniversary, Zara." The city seemed to inhale. Brianna's phone, still recording, tilted skyward so fast she nearly dropped it. The live stream she had started, intended to be a public humiliation of a woman at a bus stop, had just acquired a new subject entirely. Smith Calloway's mouth was open. He was still leaning against his Porsche. He was no longer smiling. The helicopter began to descend. This was the moment that the surrounding block revealed itself, because the surrounding block had been waiting for exactly this. The black SUVs that had been parked along the street, which no one had paid any attention to because black SUVs are simply a feature of any busy city, began to open their doors. Quietly, precisely, one by one, men in dark clothing stepped out onto the sidewalk and took their positions in a perimeter around the intersection with the calm, in practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times before. They hadn't arrived with the helicopter. They had been there the whole time, waiting. Smith's eyes moved from the helicopter to the men and back to the helicopter. Something cold moved through him, a feeling he didn't have a name for yet, because he had never in his life been in the presence of this particular species of power. The helicopter found its space in the wide intersection, the one that had been cleared. It now became obvious, in ways too subtle for an oblivious man to notice, and descended with the confidence of something that has never been told it cannot land wherever it chooses. The rotors slowed. The door opened, and Kai-jeon stepped out. He was not what people expected the first time they saw him. No, they expected someone who looked like power feels. Loud, large, consuming. They expected presence that announced itself the way Smith Calloway's presence announced itself, with noise and performance and the need to be seen. Kai-jeon was not that. He was tall, but not towering. Lean, but not slight. He wore all black, tailored trousers, a fitted jacket, no tie, and the tattoos that climbed from his wrists to his collar and up the left side of his neck were rendered in that particular ink that looked like calligraphy, like art, like something that meant something to someone who understood. His face was angular and still, and his eyes, dark, steady, unhurried, were the eyes of a man who had seen enough of the world to be surprised by very little of it. He was handsome in the way that certain dangerous things are beautiful. The way a storm is beautiful, you are drawn to it, and you are afraid of it, and you cannot quite look away. He moved across the cleared intersection without hurry, because men like Kai-jeon are never in a hurry. The world rearranges itself to accommodate their pace. His men stood still and straight at the perimeter, and the city beyond them seemed to hold its breath. He saw Zara first, the way he always saw Zara first. Before anything else, in any room or on any street, his eyes found her the way a compass finds north, automatic and absolute. And then he saw what had been done to her. The wet coat, the drenched scarf, the puddle water still dripping from the hem of her trench coat onto the pavement. He saw the phone camera. He saw Smith Calloway. His expression did not change. That was the thing about Kai-jeon that people always remarked upon afterward, when they were recounting what they had witnessed to friends and family members who hadn't been there and who would not entirely believe them. His expression never changed. The stillness was absolute. The calm was not the calm of a man who was unbothered. It was the calm of a man who had already decided exactly what was going to happen next and saw no reason to audition his feelings about it. He walked to Zara first. He stood before her and looked at her face, searching it, reading it, the way a man reads something he has memorized and still returns to. And then, without a word, he removed his jacket. He settled it over her shoulders, with a gentleness that was almost violent in contrast to the scene around it. His hands rested briefly at her shoulders. She looked up at him with those steady, warm eyes that had never once needed Smith Calloway's approval to know their own worth. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "I know," he said. He said it the way people say things they already know to be true. Then he turned, and he looked at Smith Calloway. Smith had not moved. This was partly because his legs had stopped cooperating with him, and partly because some ancient, animal part of his brain, the part that city living and Porsche payments and social media validation had nearly buried, had recognized what it was looking at and sent a very clear and very urgent message to the rest of him. Do not move. Kai-jeon crossed the space between them at the same unhurried pace. He stopped at a distance that was not close enough to be threatening and not far enough to be comfortable. He looked at Smith the way you look at something you are deciding what to do with. Smith's mouth opened. "Look, I don't—" he started. Kai held up one finger. Smith stopped talking. "You drove through that puddle on purpose," Kai said. His voice was low and even and carried no particular emotion, the way a legal document carries no emotion. Precise and final. It was not a question. Smith's mouth worked silently for a moment. His sunglasses, which he had pushed up onto his forehead, slid down over his eyes, as if seeking cover. It was an accident, Smith said. The puddle, I didn't. You stopped the car, Kai said. You got out. You said she would never make it, that she had nothing. He tilted his head slightly. You said that was why you left her. The words came back to Smith now, his own words, delivered to an audience of one camera and one laughing girlfriend. And they sounded different here, reflected off the surface of this man's attention. They sounded small. They sounded like what they were. I was just, Smith began. You were just, Kai agreed. And the way he said it made it a complete sentence, a verdict. Behind Smith, Brianna had lowered her phone. The live stream was still running. She had forgotten to stop it, and the comments were moving so fast the numbers had become a blur. Smith Calloway looked into the eyes of Kai Jian and felt, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, the precise and clarifying sensation of knowing that there is nowhere to go. That the ground beneath the version of yourself you have been performing has given way. That the audience you were playing to has changed. Ye and the new audience has different expectations, and you are not equipped to meet them. His knees hit the pavement. He didn't mean for them to. It simply happened, like a structure giving way under the wrong kind of pressure. Kai Jian crouched down to meet him, a single smooth motion. And when he spoke, his voice was so low that only Smith could hear it. The people at the perimeter could see his lips moving. They could see Smith's face change the way a landscape changes when a season turns, color draining out, something new and cold moving in. Whatever Kai Jian said lasted approximately 11 seconds. When he was finished, he stood back up. He turned to one of his men and gave a brief nod. The man stepped forward and, with a politeness that was somehow more frightening than any threat, held out his hand toward Smith. Smith, still on his knees, stared at the hand. The keys, the man said pleasantly. What? To the car. Smith looked back at the Porsche. His Porsche. His beautiful white Porsche that he had driven to this corner to display, to use as evidence of his evolution, to contrast against the bus stop, and the woman he had decided was still standing still while he moved forward. You can't take my... It was purchased, Kai's man said, still pleasantly, through a credit facility extended by Callaway Group Financial Services. A pause. Which is a subsidiary of Meridian Pacific Holdings. Another pause. Which has been operating under a provisional asset management agreement with our organization for the past 14 months. We have paperwork. He did, in fact, have paperwork. He produced it from inside his jacket, with the practiced ease of a man who brings the right documents everywhere he goes. Smith stared at the papers. The Porsche, the leased, overextended, financially creative Porsche, had been purchased through a chain of shell companies and loaned capital that wound, in ways Smith had never fully traced, or perhaps preferred not to trace, back to a financial structure that Kai Jian's organization had quietly managed for longer than Smith had owned the car. It was never really his. He had been driving, all this time, in something that belonged to the man now standing in front of him. The universe, it turned out, had a sense of humor. A very particular, very patient sense of humor. Smith dropped the keys into the outstretched hand. He was still on his knees on the wet pavement when Kai Jian walked away from him. Brianna Walsh was still holding her phone. The live stream had been running for 11 minutes. What had begun as a record of someone else's humiliation had transformed, in real time, into something she had not scripted and could not control. The comments had been moving fast since the helicopter appeared. They were moving faster now. She watched the comment feed in the corner of her screen. Is that a gold helicopter? She said nothing the whole time. OMG. Her husband sent his whole army sis the way he put his jacket on her, without saying a word. I'm crying. Sir said, the car was never yours? And walked away. Smith is on his knees on a wet street. She knew the whole time, didn't she? Didn't she? Tom, this is the greatest thing I have ever seen in my life. Brianna lowered the phone slowly. She looked at Smith, still on the wet pavement, staring at nothing. She looked at the helicopter. She looked at Zara Collins, the woman she had laughed at 8 minutes ago, the woman whose wet coat had seemed, at the time, like a punchline, standing at the edge of the intersection in a man's tailored jacket that cost more than Brianna's monthly rent, looking like the ending of a story that had been building for years. Brianna made a decision. She closed the live stream. She got back in the car that was not, as it turned out, Smith's car, and she sat very still in the passenger seat, and she looked at her hands, and she thought about choices. About the choices you make when you think you're on the winning side of something. No, about how the winning side has a way of rearranging itself without notice. The video was already everywhere, of course. She just didn't know that yet. Here is what nobody on that street understood, standing at the bus stop or watching from the windows of nearby coffee shops or paused on the sidewalk with their grocery bags sliding from their grip. Kai John had known exactly where his wife was. He always did. Not in the controlling way, not in the way of a man who keeps track of a woman, because he is afraid of what she'll do without him. In the way of a man who is simply and completely devoted to the safety and happiness of the person he has chosen, and who has the resources to ensure that safety quietly and without fuss. He had planned the anniversary surprise for 3 months. The helicopter, gold, hard because Zara had once said offhandedly at dinner in Seoul that gold was the color of things that lasted, had been arranged with the pilot 6 weeks in advance. The route over the Atlanta skyline, timed to catch the late afternoon light, was his idea. The lettering on the underside was his handwriting, scaled up. He had checked it himself. The SUVs on the perimeter were not part of the anniversary surprise. They were simply always there when Kai was in a city that was not his home base. His men moved with him the way weather moves with weather systems, inevitably, invisibly, until the moment they are needed. What Kai had not planned for was Smith Calloway. But when his car turned onto the block and he looked through the window and saw what was happening at the corner of Peachtree and 5th, saw the water on his wife's coat, the man standing over her, the phone recording, the laughter, he had felt something that most people, looking at his face, would not have been able to identify. Not anger, not rage. Those are hot, fast things. What Kai felt was colder and more certain than either of those. It was the feeling of a man who has spent his life understanding exactly what things are worth, and who had just watched someone treat the most valuable thing in his world like it was worthless. He already knew about Smith Calloway. Not because Zara had told him. She hadn't. Not beyond the brief and dismissive summary she'd offered early in their relationship. An ex, a few years ago. Not important. She had never seemed haunted by it, never seemed unfinished. She was not a woman who carried other people's opinions of her like luggage. But Kai's organization had a way of knowing things. And when you marry someone you intend to protect absolutely, you learn the landscape of their history the way a general learns terrain, not to dwell in it, but to know where the threats might come from. He knew about the shell company. He had known for months. He had left it alone, because leaving it alone was more useful than disturbing it. Until today, when disturbing it became exactly the right tool for exactly the right moment. The car was a bonus, an elegant one. What mattered, the only thing that mattered, the thing that had driven Kai across the intersection with that controlled, contained fury, was the look on Zara's face when he arrived. Not devastated, not broken. She had been through too much, and built too much to be broken by a man like Smith Calloway. But there was something in her eyes that Kai had only seen a handful of times in the year they had been together. And each time he had seen it, he had made a private and absolute promise to himself that he would reduce the number of things in the world capable of putting it there. It was the look of someone who is quietly absorbing an old cruelty that they thought they had already outlasted. He never wanted to see it again, so he had made sure, in the quiet, efficient way he made sure of everything, that Smith Calloway would not be in a position to produce it again. Kai walked back to Zara and stood before her again. Around them, the intersection had gone quiet in the particular way that extraordinary moments produce. Not silence exactly, because the city is never silent, but a hush, a collective drawing of breath. The sense of being present at something that will be described and redescribed for years. Kai looked at her. "Ready?" he said. Zara Collins looked at her husband. She took in the steadiness of him, the stillness, the absolute certainty with which he occupied every space he entered. She had loved him for a year, had been loving him, she sometimes thought, in the way that certain loves feel retroactive, like your whole life had been practicing for this specific feeling without knowing what it was practicing for. "Where are we going?" she asked, though she was smiling now, that full, real, unguarded smile that she saved for him and him alone. "Seoul," he said, "and one stop on the way." He offered his hand. She took it. He walked her across the cleared intersection toward the gold helicopter, and the rotors began to turn again. Slowly at first, and then with gathering purpose. His jacket was still around her shoulders. At the steps of the helicopter, Zara paused. She turned. She looked back at the corner of Peachtree and Fifth, at the bus stop where she had stood waiting, at the wet pavement where a man was slowly, painfully getting back to his feet, at the abandoned Porsche with its door still hanging open, at the city that had watched all of it and would go on watching long after they were gone. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She had always known, had always, somewhere deep and certain inside herself, known that the story Smith Calloway had told about her was not the true story, that his version of her departure from his life, in which he was the one who had made the choice, now who had seen her limitations clearly and wisely moved on, was a fiction he had constructed to make himself the protagonist of a narrative in which he was, in fact, the footnote. She had left him. On a Tuesday 2 years ago, with a note on the kitchen counter and a clarity that surprised even her, she had left him. Left his smallness and his need and his particular talent for making the people around him feel less than they were. She had walked out of his apartment and into her own story, and the story had led her, in ways she could not have predicted and wouldn't have dared to hope, here, to a gold helicopter with her name on it, to a man who put his jacket on her shoulders before he handled anything else. She looked at Smith Calloway one last time. He was standing now. He was watching her the way people watch things they cannot get back. Zara turned and climbed the steps, and the door closed behind her. Inside the helicopter, once they were airborne and Atlanta had become a glittering grid below them, Kai reached behind his seat and produced a bottle of champagne. Real champagne, the kind that comes from the specific region of France where they understand that some moments require the actual thing and not an approximation. Already open, already poured into 2 glasses that fit into a custom holder along the cabin wall. He handed her a glass. He held up his own. 1 year, he said. 1 year, she agreed. They drank. Outside the window, the city fell away and the horizon opened up, and the late afternoon sky was the particular shade of gold that happens only in the South. In October, when the light is doing its best work before the season changes. Then Kai said, "There's something I want to show you, before Seoul." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, the jacket she was still wearing, and produced a folded document. He held it out. She took it, unfolded it, and read. It was a property deed for the building on the corner of Peachtree and Fifth, the building that stood directly behind the bus stop where she had been standing 40 minutes ago. Her name was on it, Zara Collins Geon. She looked up at him. "I bought it 4 months ago," he said. "The ground floor is yours, all of it. We've been building it out since August." He paused. "Your flagship store. The label launches in the spring." For a moment, the only sound was the rotors and the wind and the vast, indifferent, generous sky. New Zara had been building something. For 2 years. Quietly, carefully, without announcing it to people who hadn't earned the right to know. She had been building a fashion label. Designs that drew from her heritage and her aesthetics and the particular way she saw the world, which was with precision and beauty and an eye for what lasts. She had been working with manufacturers in Seoul. She had met Kai, in fact, through a business introduction that had turned into dinner and then into something that redefined the architecture of her life. He had believed in the label before she had fully believed in it herself, had offered resources, connections, his organization's legitimate luxury division, and she had accepted slowly, carefully, on her own terms. She was not a woman who let anyone build her story for her, but she had learned. So with Kai, that accepting help from someone who genuinely saw you was not the same as being rescued. It was something else, something better. And the building where Smith Calloway had just knelt on the wet pavement, would open in the spring as the flagship location of her brand. She hadn't known about the building. She had known about the helicopter and the anniversary and Seoul, but not the building. The plaque, Kai told her, would go up tomorrow. She had chosen the bus stop today, had taken the bus, despite having a car, despite having a driver available, because she had been visiting the construction site on the 3rd floor. She went when she wanted to feel the space, to walk through it, to remind herself that it was real and not a daydream. She had been standing at that bus stop, on that corner, directly in front of the building that bore her name, when Smith Calloway had driven through the puddle. He had come to mock her at the doorstep of her own empire, and had not known it. Brianna Walsh's live stream had been running for 11 minutes and 43 seconds before she remembered to close it. In those 11 minutes and 43 seconds, it had been shared 412 times. By the time she closed it, screenshots and clips were already circulating independently. By the time the gold helicopter was over Tennessee, the clip had a dedicated hashtag. By the time they touched down in New York for a brief refueling stop, the clip had been viewed by 3 million people. The algorithm, for once, was on the right side of history. The comments were not what Brianna had expected when she started recording. So, they were not what Smith had expected either. But Smith was currently sitting in the back of a car he had been offered a ride in, because the Porsche was gone, and his phone had 17 missed calls, and he was beginning to understand the dimensions of the problem he had created for himself, which were considerably larger than he had the capacity to immediately process. The internet had watched the whole thing, the puddle, the mockery, the 11 seconds of Kai, crouched down, speaking to Smith, the jacket on Zara's shoulders, the keys changing hands, the helicopter ascending, and the thing the internet kept returning to, the image that became the image, that was screenshotted and reposted and cropped into profile pictures and printed onto mugs before the week was out, was not the helicopter, and not the confrontation, and not Smith on his knees. It was Zara Collins at the steps of the helicopter, turning back one last time. The expression on her face, captured at that exact moment, was not triumph, not contempt, not vindication, at least not the hot, satisfying kind. It was something quieter and more complete than any of those. It was the expression of a woman who has always known her worth, standing at the threshold of a life that has finally arranged itself to reflect it back to her. People named it different things in the comments, and the captions, and the late-night phone conversations. Most of them called it peace. The next morning, at the corner of Peachtree and 5th in downtown Atlanta, a small crew arrived at the ground floor of a newly renovated building. They worked quietly and efficiently, as instructed. By 10 o'clock, the window decal was in place. By noon, the sign was mounted above the door. By 2 in the afternoon, people were stopping on the sidewalk to take photos of it. The bus stop was still there, directly in front, as it had always been. The bench was dry today. The puddle was gone. The sign above the door read, Zara, an original collection opening spring. And in smaller text beneath, in the clean and particular font she had chosen herself, months ago, when this was still more dream than reality, for everyone who was told they'd never make it. The gold helicopter was somewhere over the Pacific by then, carrying 2 people towards Seoul and a dinner reservation, and another year of a life that neither of them could have predicted, and both of them had somehow, in their own separate ways, been moving toward their entire lives. So Smith Calloway's Porsche was repossessed by afternoon. Brianna's livestream had 47 million views. And Zara Collins' John, beautiful, brilliant, unbothered, was 35,000 feet above the ocean, in a cashmere blanket and a glass of champagne, and the steady warmth of being completely, finally, absolutely known. She checked her watch. She smiled. Just like she had at the bus stop. Some people call that luck. The rest of us know it's something else. It's called knowing something nobody else on the street knows yet. It's called patience. It's called being Zara. And that, right there, that is the story of Zara Collins. A woman who never argued, never explained, never needed the last word. She just waited, not out of weakness, but out of the absolute certainty that when the time was right, the sky itself would make her point for her. And it did. In gold. If this story hit different for you, if you felt it somewhere real, do us a favor and smash that like button. Leave a comment and tell us, what was the moment that got you? Was it when she smiled at the bus stop? When Kai put his jacket on her shoulders? When we found out the building was already hers? Tell us down below. We read every single one. And if you're new here, welcome. This is what we do. Stories that stay with you. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss one. We post every week, and we promise you, we are just getting started. Share this one with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who's been told they'd never make it. Someone who's still at the bus stop building something the world can't see yet. Tell them, the helicopter is coming. It's just not here yet.